I demand to see the doctor right now. You two are completely incompetent, and I will not stand for this treatment.
You never really know how much fight you have left in you until you're standing in a quiet, dimly lit hospital room, listening to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor that's counting down the seconds of your father's life, and a stranger in a $3,000 suit walks in and demands you vacate the premises because she needs the feng shui. I wish I was making that up. I wish I was telling you a story about a bad dream I had after eating spicy food too close to bedtime, but this was real, visceral, and it happened in the palliative care wing of St. Jude's Medical Center about 3 weeks ago. My dad, Arthur, a man who spent 40 years working construction, building half the homes in this county, was lying there, smaller than I'd ever seen him, his skin like parchment paper, battling the final stages of lung cancer. We had been told it was a matter of days, maybe hours, and we were just trying to hold it together, trying to memorize the shape of his hands and the sound of his shallow breathing. The room, number 304, was the corner suite, the only one on the floor with a view of the old oak trees in the courtyard, and getting him in there had felt like the one small victory we could claim in a year of terrible defeats. It was peaceful. It was quiet, until the door swung open without a knock, and in walked Mrs. Eleanor Sterling. You know the type before she even speaks, hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection, a blazer that cost more than my car, and a look on her face that suggested she smelled something unpleasant, which in this case was apparently us. She didn't look at my dad. She didn't look at the monitors. She looked straight at my mother, who was sitting in a plastic chair holding Dad's hand, and said, in a voice that was terrifyingly calm, "I believe there has been a scheduling error. This is my room." At first, we were just confused. My sister, Sarah, wiped her eyes and stood up, assuming this woman was lost, maybe looking for the cafeteria or a different patient. So she whispered, "I'm sorry, Mum, this is a private room. My father is." But Eleanor cut her off with a wave of her hand, a sharp, dismissive gesture like she was shooing away a fly. "I know it's a private room," she said, stepping further inside, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum floor. "I specifically requested the garden suite for my recovery. I have a procedure scheduled for tomorrow morning, and I was assured by the board that this room would be prepped and waiting for me by 4 o'clock. It is now 4:15. I stood up then, the blood starting to hammer in my ears, because I realized she wasn't lost. She was insane. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady because Dad hated conflict. "My father is in palliative care. This is end of life. We aren't moving anywhere. So you need to step out." She finally turned those icy blue eyes on me, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just smiled, this tight, thin smile, and said, "I am Eleanor Sterling, president of the Highland Park Homeowners Association and a Platinum Circle donor to this hospital. I don't think you understand how this works. I need the space for my post-op team, and the natural light is essential for my recovery." "Recovery from what?" I snapped, losing my patience. "Heart surgery? A transplant?" She smoothed the lapel of her blazer and said, "I am having a corrective procedure on my deviated septum, and a minor lift, and stress is detrimental to the healing process, so I suggest you pack your father's things. Surely there is a perfectly adequate room down the hall near the nurse's station." I saw my mom flinch, physically flinch, as if she'd been slapped. My dad stirred in the bed, a low groan escaping his lips, and Eleanor actually sighed, looking at her watch like his dying was wasting her valuable time. That was the moment I wanted to throw her out the window, but before I could do anything, that would land me in jail. The floor nurse, a tough-as-nails woman named Brenda, who had been taking care of Dad for weeks, walked in with fresh for bags. She took one look at the scene, my mom crying, me with my fists clenched, and Eleanor Sterling checking her makeup in the reflection of the window, and she dropped into battle mode. That double quotes Mrs. Sterling, Brenda said, her voice like gravel, "You need to leave this room immediately. This is a restricted area." Eleanor didn't even blink. "Brenda, isn't it? Well, Brenda, call Mr. Henderson. Tell him I'm here and his scheduling department has failed miserably. Tell him if this room isn't vacated, In 20 minutes, I will be reconsidering my annual contribution to the pediatric wing. She pulled out her phone, holding it up like a weapon, and started recording us. I am documenting this refusal of service, she announced, panning the camera over my dying father. Documentation of hostile environment created by non-priority. Patience, that was the lowest thing I had ever seen a human being do. My sister lunged forward to block the camera, sobbing, begging her to have some decency. But Eleanor just stepped back, sneering, narrating into her phone about unruly squatters. Brenda slammed her hand on the call button for security, but Eleanor was already dialing, putting the hospital administrator on speakerphone. We heard the ring, and then a nervous male voice answered, "Mrs. Sterling, is everything all right?" "No, Arthur," she said, staring me dead in the eye. "It is not all right. I am standing in the garden suite, and it is occupied by a terminal case who refuses to leave. You told me I would have the best room for my recovery." The administrator on the other end started stammering, "Mrs. Sterling, I didn't realize the bed was still occupied. The patient was supposed to be transitioned." Transitioned. That's the corporate word for died or moved to the basement to die in the dark. My stomach turned over. "Well, fix it," she snapped. "I have my private nurses arriving at 6. Get security up here." She hung up and looked at us with pure triumph. "You see, it's nothing personal. It's just logistics. He won't know the difference in another room, but I certainly will." Security arrived 5 minutes later. Two guys who looked like they would rather be anywhere else on earth. They saw Eleanor's donor badge, the platinum card she flashed that apparently gave her the right to play God. And they hesitated. They actually hesitated. She saw that weakness and pounced on it. "Officer," she said, pointing a manicured finger at my dad's bed, "this family is trespassing in a reserved suite. Please assist them in gathering their belongings." My mom stood up then, trembling, and stood between Eleanor and the bed. "He built this town," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He built the roof over your head, probably. And you want to move him like he's trash?" Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Sentimentalism doesn't pay for MRI machines, sweetie. Donations do." Just then, Mr. Henderson, the administrator, came jogging into the room, sweating through his cheap suit. He looked at Eleanor, looked at my dad, and you could see him doing the math in his head. Morality versus money. Money won. He turned to us, wringing his hands, and said, "Folks, I am so sorry, but we have an administrative mix-up. We have a very comfortable semi-private room down the hall. Very quiet. If we could just transition your father, we can have porters here in 5 minutes. He can't be moved." Brenda, the nurse, barked, "His vitals are unstable. Moving him now causes unnecessary distress. It's against protocol." Henderson glared at her. "I am overriding protocol. Brenda, we need to accommodate Mrs. Sterling." I felt like I was in a nightmare. I looked at my dad, his chest rising and falling so slowly, and I realized these people were going to let him die in a hallway or an elevator just to please a woman who wanted a nose job with a view. I stepped forward, getting right in Henderson's face. "If you touch that bed," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "I will make sure every news station in the state knows you evicted a dying veteran for a donor's vanity." Eleanor laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Oh, please, nobody cares about your sob story. The world runs on contracts and agreements, and I have an agreement." She walked over to the window, blocking the view of the trees my dad loved, and started dictating to the security guards where she wanted her flowers placed once we were gone. It was the most grotesque display of entitlement I had ever witnessed. It felt like evil, plain and simple. But then, Brenda, who had been quiet for a moment, furiously tapping on the bedside computer terminal, suddenly stopped. She squinted at the screen, then looked at the bed, specifically at the metal frame near the footboard. She had a look on her face I hadn't seen before, not anger, but something like shock, followed by a slow, dawning realization. She walked over to the foot of the bed, knelt down, and pulled aside the blanket that was draping over the metal rail. What are you doing?" Henderson asked, annoyed. "Disconnect the monitors, Brenda." No, Brenda said, standing up slowly. She looked at Henderson, then she looked at Eleanor Sterling, and a strange, satisfied smile touched her lips. Mr. Henderson, you can't move this patient. And Mrs. Sterling, you can't have this room. Not now, not tomorrow, not ever. Eleanor spun around, her face twisting in rage. Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I will have your license. I know exactly who you are, Brenda said, her voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. And I know exactly what this bed is. She pointed to a small, tarnished brass plaque bolted to the frame of the hospital bed, something none of us had noticed because it was usually covered by linens. You might want to read the fine print of your own contract, Mrs. Sterling. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that usually only happens right after a thunderclap, where the air feels electrified and heavy. Eleanor Sterling blinked, her perfectly masquerade lashes fluttering for a second as if she couldn't process the audacity of a nurse talking back to a platinum donor. She stepped away from the window, her heels clicking slower this time, curiosity warring with her arrogance. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, she hissed, but I assure you, my contracts are ironclad. Oh, they are, Brenda said, crossing her arms over her scrubs. Ironclad, that's the problem. She gestured to the foot of the bed again. Mr. Henderson, check the asset tag on this unit. The administrator, looking confused and sweaty, bent down. He squinted at the brass plaque Brenda had uncovered. I watched his eyes scan the text, and I saw the color drain out of his face. He went pale, then red. Then he looked up at Eleanor with terrified eyes. Mrs. Sterling, he squeaked, we have a problem. What? She snapped, marching over. Move out of the way. She shoved Henderson aside and looked down at the plaque herself. My mom and I were huddled by Dad's head, holding our breath, having no idea what was happening. We watched Eleanor read the inscription. We saw her posture stiffen. We saw the hand that was clutching her designer bag start to tremble, the knuckles turning white. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just froze, staring at that piece of metal like it was a ghost. Read it, Brenda said softly. Read it out loud. Eleanor didn't speak. She couldn't. She was paralyzed, so Brenda recited it for her, from memory or maybe just because she knew the history of the ward better than anyone. Donated in loving memory of Dr. Jonathan Sterling for the exclusive use of terminal palliative care patients, not to be reassigned, reserved, or utilized for general recovery under any circumstances. Per the request of the donor, Eleanor Sterling. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. My sister gasped. We all looked at the bed my dying father was lying in. It wasn't just a hospital bed. It was her husband's memorial. Your husband died in this room, didn't he? Brenda asked, her voice dropping the hardness, becoming something quieter, almost sad. 7 years ago, room 304. This was his bed. You bought it. You donated the upgraded mattress, the frame, everything, specifically so other families wouldn't have to suffer on the standard equipment. And you signed a legal clause ensuring it would never be taken away from a dying patient, just because some VIP wanted a room with a view. Eleanor slowly lifted her hand to her mouth. The arrogance, the Ice Queen persona, it just shattered. It fell away in chunks. She wasn't the Hoa president anymore. She was a widow standing at the scene of the worst day of her life. She whispered, her voice cracking. I wanted to be close to him. And that was the twist that none of us saw coming. It wasn't about the view. It wasn't about the deviated septum or the status. She was terrified of her surgery, terrified of being in the hospital alone. And in her twisted, grief-stricken logic, she thought if she could just demand this room, this specific bed, she would feel safe. She would feel him. She had become a monster because she was trying to fight off the ghosts, but in doing so, she had forgotten the very protection she put in place to honor him. I didn't know, she stammered, tears cutting tracks through her perfect foundation. She looked at my dad, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the fear in my mom's eyes, the defensiveness in mine. She looked at the bed where her husband took his last breath, and she realized she was the villain in the exact same story she had lived 7 years ago. I didn't know it was this bed. I just asked for the room. It's the only specialized bed on the floor, Brenda said gently. You made sure of that. Mr. Henderson, trying to salvage the situation, piped up, well, obviously, given the circumstances. Mrs. Sterling, we can overlook the clause if you... No, Eleanor shouted, startling everyone. She wiped her face aggressively, trying to regain some composure, but the walls were down. No, the clause stands. Jonathan would be ashamed of me. She looked at my mom, and for a second, I thought she was going to apologize and leave, but she did something else. She walked over to the bedside, right next to where I was, standing, and she looked down at my dad. He's in pain. She asked my mom. Yes, my mom whispered. The meds aren't holding it for long. Eleanor nodded, sniffing. She reached into her purse, and I tensed up, expecting her to pull out her phone again. But she pulled out a checkbook. She scribbled something furiously, tore it out, and handed it to Mr. Henderson. Upgrade them, she commanded, but the bite was gone from her voice. Transfer the funds immediately. Open the family suite on the 4th floor. The one with the balcony and the sleeping quarters for the guests. Move the bed. Move this bed with him. He needs the pressure relief mattress. I'll pay for the sterilization and the transport. Henderson looked at the check and his eyes bugged out. Mrs. Sterling, that suite is $3,000 a night. I don't care, she said, her voice trembling. Get it done. And get the best pain specialist on call. Dr. Evans, tell him Eleanor called in a favor. She turned to my mom. The suite, it has a pull-out couch. You can sleep next to him. You shouldn't have to sit in a plastic chair. My mom, who has a heart bigger than the ocean, stood up and did the unthinkable. She hugged her. She hugged the woman who had tried to evict us 10 minutes ago. Eleanor stiffened, then melted, sobbing into my mother's shoulder for a brief, heavy moment. It was the weirdest, most human thing I've ever seen. To women, connected by nothing but the terrible reality of losing a husband, standing in the middle of a hospital room. Eleanor pulled away, fixed her blazer, and looked at me. I am profoundly sorry, she said. I forgot what it felt like to be the one in the chair. She left the room then, walking out much quieter than she came in. Security followed her, looking confused. We didn't see her again, but her influence remained. Within an hour, we were moved to the 4th floor suite. It was like a hotel. We had a private balcony, a kitchenette, and actual beds for me and my sister to sleep on. And true to her word, she made them bring the bed. Dr. Sterling's bed up with us. My dad passed away 2 days later. He went peacefully, in his sleep, with the balcony door open so he could hear the wind in the trees, holding my mom's hand. It was the dignified end he deserved. At the funeral, a massive arrangement of white lilies arrived. There was no name on the card, just a handwritten note that said, for the builders, who leave the world stronger than they found it. Rest in peace. We knew who it was. I still think about that day. A lot. I think about how easy it is to let grief turn you hard, to let money turn you cruel. Eleanor Sterling was the villain of our story for about 45 minutes, but in the end, she was just another person broken by loss, trying to control the uncontrollable. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it, and it reminded me that sometimes the laws we make, like that clause on the bed, are there to save us from our worst selves. I wonder if she ever got her surgery. I wonder if she walks through that hospital now and sees the ghosts of her past a little differently. It's a strange world, folks. You never know who you're fighting, and you never know what baggage they're dragging through the door with. So, here's my question for you guys. Could you have forgiven her? If someone tried to kick your dying family member out of a room, could you have hugged them like my mom did? Or would you have held on to that anger forever? And do you think her redemption at the end makes up for how she started? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Take care of your loved ones and hug them tight while you can.